Hello, everyone. My name is Eileen Sandberg. I'm with the Federation for Children with Special Needs, and today is our January webinar for the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center for Special Education Surrogate Parents. We are honored today to have Representative Kay Kahn, representative of the 11th Middlesex District and the Massachusetts House Chair of the Joint Committee on Children, Family, and Persons with Disabilities, join us for a discussion on current legislation. Representative Kahn's background is as a psychiatric nurse, and she has done so much great work for children and families and those with disabilities over her 25 years in the House that I could spend the whole hour talking about her work, which I won't. So to make it more brief, notable recent legislation includes a resolve to reduce racial inequities in maternal health, which was just signed into law. Representative Kahn has also been instrumental in many other measures, including greater public reporting for the Department of Children and Families data, and the ongoing push for electronic background packs containing the educational information for children in DCF care. Welcome, Representative Kahn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eileen. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to have this opportunity to talk about the needs of children with special needs. And I feel really honored that I've had an opportunity to be in a position as the House Chair of the Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. And I've learned so much and still learning about what the needs are and how to be effective, I think, as a legislator. What can I do? What can my committee do to really make a difference? And I feel honored to have this position. And it's a position that I really feel you can get things done. And I feel like we have been successful and we have been able to get many things done for children with special needs as with other children in other situations as well. And it's been a great pleasure to work with my legislative colleagues. We have great colleagues in the legislature who have been members of the committee, and some of them have been members of the committee and then moved to other committees, but they've still been invested in the work that we've been able to do through the Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. I also want to give a shout out to my staff. I have great staff who have been just amazing and also very committed to the work that we do. And so I just feel very fortunate that I've had this, again, had the opportunity, but also had this ability to really try and help the many children and families across the state. I feel that my background as a psychiatric nurse, clinical specialist, has been especially helpful to me because I think I just feel all of the needs of people who come before us, and I just hope to be able to continue to do this work. And it's been a great honor to serve not just the citizens of the 11th Middlesex District in the city of Newton, but also work across the state and work with so many stakeholders and so many folks who are really interested in doing the right thing for children and families with special needs. And we certainly have a lot of special needs kids in our care. So it's been great to work with you, Eileen, and to be here today.
Well, thank you so much. When you talk about, learning more about the needs of people in our community with disabilities, I mean, I think this year has been so difficult in so many ways. And part of that is I think some of those needs have really changed for some of our children with disabilities. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread, what do you think are some of the most critical things that we need to keep in mind and advocate for?
Well, I think the one, I guess, silver lining in all of this is that we have been able to have these meetings, do these webinars. And I think as a result of that, I've had an opportunity to have more meetings with the Department of Children and Families, with the child advocate, with many of the stakeholders. And it's been a good opportunity to really have people share their concerns. And I think it also has been somewhat of a good kind of movement toward getting, more close to families that are really experiencing some of these needs. And not that we couldn't do it before when we had our public hearings and we filed our legislation, but there's something, I think, a little bit more intimate right now when we have these meetings on Zoom. And so that I think has been helpful in some ways. And definitely, I think the pandemic has created so many more issues, I think, for all of us, and challenges. And certainly getting to understand more about what's going on in the schools, how we can be more helpful there, especially with kids with special needs. And so I think that, there, and I think, so I'm a mental health professional, and I think, mental health, the behavioral health and mental health is certainly popping up more. There's more concern, there's more issues, and it's very hard for kids. I'm actually a grandmother. I have 7 grandchildren, and so I see it a little bit from their perspective too, and not being able to get out and see their friends, and just coping with being on Zoom with school, and there's just many more challenges that we haven't had to deal with in the past. So I think I have to say that I think in many ways, it's been an eye opener to what is going on out there, what some of the great needs are. There's not as many views of kids that we've had in the past. If kids aren't showing up or not coming to school, we don't really know what's happening in the families. So I think there are a lot of questions about particularly the relationship between the Department of Children and Families and the school department, with Department of Early Education and Care. So I know there are a lot of concerns. I mean, I've certainly had these concerns right from the very beginning, and had felt all along that we need to be working closely with DESE and DCF, and to bring them together so that there is a better understanding of what the needs are. And I've been concerned about the fact that some kids are just not showing up in school, and then how do we reach out to that group and make sure that they are? How does DESE make sure they're coming to school? What are the things that we need to do to make sure that kids are in school? And even if it's difficult, and it's also been, as we know, difficult on parents, particularly of young children, to help them understand this whole Zoom idea. So I think on the one hand, for some kids, who like technology, it's probably been fine. They know how to do it, but there are lots of kids who don't. And so that's been, I think, a tremendous challenge for parents, whether it's kids who are in DCF or whether it's just kids and families in general, having to accommodate the needs of getting their children to school, and especially if they're also working. So just the challenges of working, being a parent that has to work but also has young children at home that need a lot of supervision and assistance with schoolwork, and keeping them engaged, and helping them really move along so that they do get an education. And I think the schools have also had the challenge of coping with all of this as well. So there are definitely many, many challenges, and maybe some things that have been helpful, like being able to do a webinar like this, I think is really a great opportunity. And I want to thank all the people that are joining us this afternoon. Looks like a good number of folks are online. So I hope that the information that I can provide and talk about today will be helpful. And if you have more questions, please feel free to send us questions. We're happy to be helpful in any way that we can. And if you have ideas or thoughts about what we could be doing as legislators to be more helpful, particularly for families who have kids with special needs. And if you're a foster family with kids with special needs, if we're not hitting the things that we need to hit, we're happy to be available and to figure out, where we can go, what we can do. And so I value hearing from, all of you out there today. I think it looks like 47 people are on the line. So, and again,
we're also streaming live on Facebook, so it's higher than that.
Oh, okay. So again, I'm happy to be available. I'm happy to try to, do what we think or feel could be helpful to the community. And I just think it's so important. And I've also always been a person that really is concerned about kids with special needs and families that have those challenges, even before COVID. It was something that I feel really strongly about, because there's so many different kinds of special needs that need to be addressed. It's not one particular one, but many different challenges. And so I've tried to, with my staff, we try to address what's out there, what the needs are, and to understand. And we depend a lot on hearing from folks like yourselves who are on the line today. It's very meaningful for us to hear. And to, when we're about to file legislation for the next session, the legislation that
That
needs.
was my next question. What's coming up?
Okay. So that's to get us started. But again, I'm here. I'm really eager to hear what your questions are, what your thoughts are, how we can be more helpful, and hope that we can make a difference.
Oh, I think you make a big difference. And that really was my next question, just in terms of what are you expecting in the 192nd session of the legislature? What do you think is going to rise to the surface in terms of legislation? And also just putting in a plug for those electronic backpacks, as always.
Sure.
As you know, we're very big advocates for that.
Right, exactly. Well, first of all, as far as the electronic backpack goes, I'm really pleased to announce that I will be filing the bill again, and then Representative Leboeuf, who's from Worcester, has been very interested in electronic backpack and will be joining me as a signer on the legislation. So I think it's always good to expand if you can. And he's been very interested in education, and comes from a community with probably many challenges. So he's very interested in joining me on the as a second signer on the legislation. So I'm very happy about that. And we know from the last session that Auditor Suzanne Bump was very interested in this legislation and testified. And also met with me, with Denise Garlick who is the vice chair of House Ways and Means. And so I think it's definitely at the top of our list in terms of wanting to get it done. I think it's incredibly important legislation, and particularly I think for foster families who are working with young people who are moving around, who have moved around. And it really gives more information when a child goes to a new school, a new setting, gives the school department much more information that they can really utilize, I think, in terms of working with that particular child. So I think it's a very, very important piece of legislation. I'm very hopeful that we can get it done. So as many of you probably know, so this is the beginning of the 192nd session. We have a new Speaker of the House, Speaker Mariano, and I'm really looking forward to working with him. I think he is very available. He's very open to ideas, and I'm very. He also comes from Quincy, so if any of you are in his district, you can also make sure that you get to him if there are pieces of legislation that you really would like to see happen. Because we like to have the folks from the outside, the people like yourselves who are, I consider you folks go to the lobbyists, out on the outside. I consider legislators on the inside are the lobbyists for legislation on the inside. So I'm very much looking forward to working with Speaker Mariano. I have to thank Speaker DeLeo, who put me in this position initially when he became Speaker. So I'm hoping, I don't know yet, but I'm hoping that I will be able to continue in this position, because I have found it extremely rewarding to work with my colleagues in the legislature, but also with the many stakeholders, including all of you who are online today. So, I think definitely the backpack legislation will be refiled, and we will really work hard again to get it done. And I think that I think we have a good opportunity, and I'd like to move it forward quickly, because I think it's always better to get things done sooner rather than later, because at the end of the session, it's always a rush. Because there's so many bills, and people should know that about 6,000 bills get filed every session. So on February 19th is the deadline to getting bills filed. So probably about 6,000 bills will get filed in February, and coming from 200 legislators, both from the House and the Senate. The good news, I think, is that generally when we file legislation, we have a certain time limit in terms of becoming a co-sponsor of legislation. And though this year the Senate adopted the idea of having a longer period of time to co-sign. I think they can co-sign up until the bill is presented on the, on the floor of the Senate. The House has always had a limit or a deadline, but they've opened that up this year, and I'm not exactly sure when the deadline is, but it gives us more time to really look through all of the legislation that we've either supported in the past or maybe new legislation that's coming out. So it gives us a better opportunity to, to see what we want to sign on to. And also gives gives you folks out there a period of time, more time to get to your legislators, because that's what's really important. And I always like to say, I hope everybody on this call or on the line will understand how important it is for you as citizens of Massachusetts to reach out, to find out who your legislator is. So I think that's really critical. And if you don't know who represents you, you can find out very easily. You can type in where do I vote? And when you type that in on a computer, it'll come up who actually represents you. Or you can call your city hall or town hall. There's just many ways that you can find out who represents you. And I just think that that's really critical. And I like to emphasize that because it's much better for you to contact your own legislator. So you want your own legislator to understand what your needs are, what you're interested in. And we as legislators really like to hear from our constituents. We really like to know, what's important to them. And so I really urge you to make that effort to find out who represents you, to not hesitate to send an email to introduce yourself. I live in your district. This is what is important to me. And these are some bills that are coming up that I would hope that you would be supportive of. And so just an example would be the backpack bill, that will be refiled. And so you just touch base with your representative and say that this bill, the electronic backpack bill, has been refiled. You maybe say a few sentences of what it does, and ask them to get involved and sign on as a co-sponsor. So I think the Federation, I would suggest that some of the bills that we'll be talking about today, you might send out to your stakeholders, your people that you work with, and let them know that these are the bills that you want their own legislator to sign on to. And that's critical, because when a bill comes up, if it has, 100 signers on, that's going to make a difference. So the folks that really try to move the bills through, they can say, as a chair of a committee, you can say, this is a bill that's really important. 100 legislators have actually signed on to this legislation. So I hope that you will take a strong look at this bill. So the more people that sign on, the better. So I think with all the bills that I know the Federation is interested in, if you can get your folks to call find out who their legislator is and get them to ask them to sign on and to really take a strong look at the legislation.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Really
Are there other things that we can do if we want to, as individuals, be involved in what's coming up with legislation? Can we testify? What kinds of things can we do?
Yes. So every bill in Massachusetts, every bill that gets filed gets a public hearing. So every bill. So first of all, it's, as I said, 6,000 bills get filed. They all go to the clerk of the House and the clerk of the Senate. If there's lots of bills are filed, when they get filed, they're both filed by a senator and a representative. So many bills have two main sponsors from the House and the Senate. Some do not. Some might just have a House sponsor. Some might just have a Senate sponsor. But the bills go to the clerks in the House and the Senate. And then the clerks decide which committee the bill will be assigned to. And so we have about 30 different committees in the legislature. Most of them are joint committees. So it has a Senate chair and a House chair, like the Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. It has a House chair, it has a Senate chair. And then the clerk decides which bills should come to the Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. And so he makes that decision. If it's a new bill, he'll decide maybe by the title of the bill, which committee, but but bills that have been already filed or being refiled, they'll generally go to the committee that they were sent to previously. So and every committee gets a certain number of bills depending on what the topic is. So for example, my committee on children and families, we get close to 200 bills they're all filed by legislators. But you have the Judiciary Committee that gets maybe 1,000 bills, because there are lots of bills that seem to come before the Judiciary Committee. Then there's the Education Committee. We have higher education and sort of K through 12 education, and then we have early education. So the Committee on Education generally does early education, K through 12, whereas you have higher ed, and those are questions or bills that will go to the Committee on Higher Education. And those are important to think about as well, because, young people who are, have special needs, whether it's a developmental disability or whether it's, something that is like, a physical disability. These are kids that many of them want to go to college. And so we work very closely also with the Committee on Higher Education to make sure that kids can transfer, or move on from high school into the college level. I have a young man who works in my office. He comes in 1 day a week, and he has Down syndrome, and he's been to college. He's got a degree. He's a very smart kid. He's has been in my office probably 3 years or more, once a week. He's very much a part of my team, the team, the children and families and persons with disabilities team, and he's terrific. And so we also, I think one of the interesting things that happened this session was that we had my vice chair, Josh Cutler, was very interested in the whole issue around workability. So we have kids who, want to work, or, it doesn't even matter what level of disability. We want to be able to provide them with some opportunities to work. And so he developed a whole sort of subcommittee to look at workability for kids who have disabilities. And he was able to get it passed into legislation. So there's going to be a permanent committee looking at workability issues for kids with, any kind of developmental disability or any kind of disability. And so it's, we can send you, Eileen, I'll send you out the piece about that, because I think it'll be interesting for you to know about and think about. And
yes, absolutely.
So I think we're just very excited about that. And he worked really hard the whole session, meeting with a lot of different stakeholders about this issue. And so we're very excited about it. And again, it's a permanent commission that will really focus on the workability issues for young people, with disabilities. So that's why I say all of the education committees are equally as important, whether it's higher ed or, K through 12 or early ed. And so there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of focus, I think, on young people with disabilities, and it's really critical. I mean, and I see it, and sometimes you don't even think about these until it comes before you. And I've had another young person in my office came in as an intern from the city of Newton, who wanted to intern in my office, and he had a physical disability. And it was just little things like, when he first came, there were things about the office that really wasn't set up to handle someone with a physical disability. It was difficult for him to open the door to get into the office, which we hadn't even thought about. And we have 2 restrooms in the office, and to open, because the State House is a big old building with big, huge, heavy doors. And so we were able to get there's an ADA specialist for legislators, and we were able to get to him, and he changed the doors so you could push a button to get in to these doors. So I mean, it's things that you don't even think about. We often thought years ago about just getting up the stairs or the steps, but now, I mean, it's just getting through doors. And so there's just lots of things to think about. And so it's just been a great opportunity for me actually to learn, and I'm still learning as I go through this opportunity that I've had, and it's really been wonderful. So I just to reiterate the fact that on February 19th will be bill filing deadline. So that's the deadline when we can actually file bills, but people can sign on, legislators can sign on for a longer period of time to make sure they become sponsors. So again, I would just emphasize that you want to make sure people know they know who their legislator is, both on the House side and the Senate side, and reach out to both the House and the Senate, your representatives on both the House and the Senate, and ask them, tell them that these are bills that you're really interested in. I think sending an email is a great way to do it. And legislators really pay attention to their own constituents, because there's so much to do and so much to think about. It's really best for us to be more helpful to our own constituents. And we like to, know who represents, who live in our districts, and to make, to form those relationships. And so I think those are important key pieces. And then just, I think the Federation will send out information about which bills would be important to talk to your legislators about. And so I think you play a very important role, as do all of the folks who are really on this call and more, play a huge role in speaking out in favor of legislation that is important to you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we certainly try, and we're very interested in workability. We do a lot of work around transition age youth, kids who are graduating or leaving school anywhere between 18 and 22. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to interconnect those, because we know that a lot of adults with disabilities are underemployed or unemployed. So it's a huge focus. Well, let me ask you a question about DCF, if I may switch topics a tiny bit. You had mentioned at our conference, actually, that the DCF report is out and available online on youth and foster care, the 2019 and 2020 reports, and they are great. There's a lot of information, and I think it's really obvious the department is putting a lot of work into improving in a number of areas, including stability for kids. But the one question that really stood out to me reading it is that they don't seem to have a lot of information on educational outcomes for youth in foster care. Now, we know that our kids who are in the custody of DCF have very likely experienced trauma. If they don't have other disabilities, they have a trauma history. So it's very concerning. And the metric that they put into the report is that the graduation rates for kids in DCF custody were 56.8%. And you contrast that to the statewide average of 88%. I've looked at it across all kinds of racial and ethnic kind of cuts of the data, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, honestly. We know that DCF is disproportionately has children of color, but the graduation rates for those children are not that low. So I guess the question is, can more data be shared publicly about educational outcomes for children who are involved with DCF? And also, what exactly does the DCF Data Committee do, and how do they work?
Well, I think those, excellent question. So just a little bit of background. So you're specifically, I think, referring to the data task force, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Okay. So, well, there's several bills I think that are important that are going to be refiled. One of the bills is, well, first of all, in the past session, we had a bill. We had several individual bills, and they got lumped together in an omnibus bill. So in the omnibus bill, we had probably 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that were included. And I think that it was, so it didn't go through at the end of the session. So none of those bills that were in that omnibus bill got through. And so I think that, I think it's important to know 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 that, I think it's Sorry.
That's okay.
I think I think the plan this year is for this session is to file the bills again individually. So it's the data task force legislation.
Mhm.
It will be the foster parents bill of rights legislation. Then there was some other pieces in that omnibus bill that had to do with DESE and DESE reporting the numbers of children that sort of more the numbers of children that are showing up in schools. So they wanted to do, and there is a report that just came out on that.
Mhm.
And can you hold a second?
Sure, of course. We've all been there. Folks, if you have questions, I see that there's some in the chat and some in the Q&A, and we're going to get to that shortly. If you have other questions, feel free to put them, if you could put them in the Q&A, that would be great. Just a little bit easier for me than looking at two streams of questions.
I apologize. No,
We have all been there.
it's a little bit of a crisis at home. In my house, there's a neighbor locked out of her house, and she's
Oh no.
disabled, and so we're not sure who to call. So, because I don't think I have the number of the family member. So anyway, we'll try to deal with it. So, okay, I'm sorry. Where were we? So I think I was talking about the bills.
Yeah.
That
the data task force, the foster parents bill of rights.
Right, and then there was a piece in there in this legislation, the omnibus bill, having to do with DESE, sort of looking at attendance. And we just on Friday received a report from DESE about the attendance. And so I think that what we need to be looking at going forward is filing bills separately, not as an omnibus bill. It's much more difficult to kind of negotiate. I think a large bill, I think it's easier if we can move the bills through independently. And so that's what I'm going to recommend. And I think the DESE piece is good, but it's not enough. I think we need to be thinking more on, the attendance, of course, is really important, and to figure out why the numbers are what they are. And I don't have that information. It just came in on Friday. And then there's also work being done on something called the foster care review, which is also a legislation that I think will probably be filed. And so Tricia Farley-Bouvier was the filer of the foster care bill of rights, and I think probably she'll be doing something on the foster care review. I'm not sure yet about that. And we as a committee have made some recommendations on the bill, on that particular bill. But I think these are all important pieces of legislation that will be coming through, and the backpack bill also will be included, and there'll probably be others. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the 19th, what is going to get filed that really, I think, is important for the Federation. And we're happy to work with you on that, just, to point out pieces of legislation that you would really want to know about and would want to get out to your folks who are, members of the Federation. And others, I'm sure, will pop up in terms of, wanting information. I think the work the Federation does is really critical and greatly needed and important, to really inform folks about the what's happening in the legislature. So that's, and that's part of transparency. You want to know what's going on. You want to know what bills are being filed. You want to know, and some of them, we don't necessarily, so we look very carefully at all the bills. We don't necessarily think that they're all worth moving out. Some may need more work. We make our recommendations before we put a bill out. I work very closely with the Senate. So the Senate chair of the committee and I and the staff will look everything over very carefully, do the research, listen to testimony. So all of these bills will get a public hearing. And so I think the Federation, as you mentioned, what else can the Federation do? I think very important uh, to come to the public hearings. And there are just different ways that we're happy to be helpful in terms of how to organize that so that you are certain to get people there and to have them testify. They can people can testify individually, or they can join a group of 3 or 4 or 5 people. I think the one thing that would be important to think about is the testimony. Testimony, you can write long pages of testimony, which are great. And we like to have, all kinds of testimony is wonderful. It helps the committee, really understand better what the needs are. But in terms of testifying in front of the committee, it's better if you can be very concise, just maybe each person, if you're doing it as a group, specializes in one area of interest. And you only get 3 minutes usually when you testify. So just to be very clear and concise is important, but you can hand in pages and pages, and we read everything and we look at everything. So we can talk more at some point around testifying in front of a committee, whether it's my committee or anyone else's committee. It's the same thing.
Okay. Well,
So
shall we?
offer help on that issue.
Okay, great. Shall we open up to questions from our audience? We have quite a few.
Okay, sure.
Let's see. One question is, I think there needs to be greater oversight of hospitals when children are in the hospital, both for short and long-term stays, to ensure they continue to obtain their free and appropriate public education while in the hospital. So children on IUPs.
Right. I think that's a great question. I know that generally when kids are in hospitals, there is the opportunity. I mean, from what I know is that usually there's an they can continue their education while they're in school. I think there's special arrangements that are made with the Department of Early Education and Care, DESE, to make sure the kids are educated. So I'd have to look up, what the regulation is on that. Happy to check on that for you. But generally speaking, I think there's a requirement that children continue to be able to be in school while they're in a hospital.
Yeah. Here's another comment, really. In terms of legislation, I think funding for more mental health beds and services and money to train more mental health and special education providers would be a priority.
Totally agree.
And we know we're going through just such a crisis right now in Massachusetts, really across the country, in terms of there not being enough pediatric and youth mental health beds.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I think that quite honestly, I think the legislature is aware of that, and I think they're trying to figure that out. That was a piece that was there was actually a piece of that was in the data. That was in the bill, the omnibus bill. There was a piece that we were really trying to put more emphasis on mental health for kids. So I think that will definitely be something that will be in the forefront going forward in the next session.
Yeah, that's great. Is there a place for coordination between DESE and DCF for ensuring students are participating in education? Are you referring to something specific or in general when you say there should be better communication?
Well, I think what we're still learning, I think, because of the pandemic and being, mostly on, in Chromebooks and, in working with families, on Chrome, with Chromebooks and with, education, Zoom and so forth. So there's still, I think, probably a lot for us to try to figure out. I mean, I've been an advocate myself for making sure that social workers, for example, who are working with kids, who are in foster care, that there also be the ability to have DESE also. So in other words, if they're working with a family, that everything gets viewed, whether it's the educational piece or the needs of kids that are in foster care through their legal support system, as well as the DESE need. So it's trying to, I think what I hadn't realized also is that I think with education, every child needs to have their own Chromebook. So I think
Mhm.
that's probably a challenge, to make sure that every child in a family has a Chromebook.
Mhm.
Or the same if they're in congregate care. I think each child needs to have their own Chromebook. And then I
Yeah,
guess
that,
I've been advocating for the ability to maybe work with DESE around not just having the Chromebook available for education, but also for the social worker who can use maybe there's a way of using the same Chromebook for the social worker to be able to work with the child around, social services needs,
Mhm.
so that so both are there, both are sort of in the home, whether it's the teacher or the social worker. And I don't know
Mhm.
if that's happening as much as maybe it could be or should be. So that's something that I feel important for us to be trying to figure out the kind of the coordination, I think,
Mhm.
that's going on between DCF and DESE. So I would just like to understand more about how that's working. Is it working? What can we do to enhance those abilities to communicate in both ways? So that's something that I am interested in. And again, I think this report that just came out from DESE that talks about the attendance, will give us a sense of where we need
Mhm.
to go and what we need to be doing so that there's more coordination. I think in the bill that we're putting together on the foster care review, there'll be, I think, something in there that's more coordination, I think, between DESE and DCF. And so that's something that I'm going to try to stay on top of, because I think that I just don't know what that coordination is looking like now. And I just feel that it's important for us to figure that out. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Um, okay, here's another question. Do you have any insights into the specific bills you are aware of regarding student education during COVID? This is something that you and I talked a little bit about offline around the congregate care cases, but are there other things that are in the works in terms of education and COVID? Or is
Well,
the
again,
time frame of passing a bill too long for COVID? Hopefully.
well, I think, the fact that we just got this report
Mhm.
about the attendance, I think that will be a wake up call in terms of what we need to be doing or thinking about, going forward. And then I also think that it's really important for us to continue to support legislation related to the data task force, because I think that's a place where one could maybe be doing more around coordinating between DCF and DESE. So
Mhm.
I think these are things that, we will be refiling the data task force legislation. And so
Mhm.
questions like this, I think, are important and will help us think more about the coordination that needs to happen, and maybe more data on how that's working out is something that we could be thinking about and
And
doing.
maybe more public data would be great.
Right.
So people who are concerned and can't find out what's going on can get more insight into it. This is a similar question, but so well phrased, I'm going to read it anyway. From Jenny Dunkley. School days, where IDEA is the governing law, and wraparounds, where we have DCF, DDS, DMH, MRC. Responsibilities keep planning, programming, and services all in silos. Um, Separate functional and geographic wallets are a barrier to equity. Interagency collaboration and planning is such a continuing challenge to provide the needs for the whole child. Is there anything that can be done to unite these systems?
Uh, um,
Did I give you a big enough problem?
well, I think that, I mean, first of all, I think the fact that there is this data task force has been a big, huge, I think, movement that has really been I think there's much more information now than we've had in the past, about how many kids we're taking care of. I mean, there are about 45,000 children that are in DCF care. And so, those needs are probably not the same for all. but certainly education is a big part of that. And
Mhm,
so I think that what I see is, if we can be moving in the direction of more coordination, I
mhm.
think
Yeah.
between DESE and DCF, I think that would be really good. And then, of course, there are all these other agencies that intersect with all of that as well. And there are also lots of kids that are not necessarily DCF kids that need assistance uh, as well. So I think that
Mhm,
as a committee on children, families, and persons with disabilities, we oversee so we work with the Department of Youth Services, work with the Department of Transitional Assistance, which is the homeless population. We work with the Department, obviously, of Children and Families. We work with the Department of Developmental Disabilities. So I think as a committee, we are trying to be very cognizant of the fact that there are just lots of different service needs. And I think we can be helpful, in terms of figuring out how to coordinate all of that. And there also are interagency councils as well. So I think it's a great question. I think it just really emphasizes the need for more coordination.
yeah.
And so I think that that's something we will definitely be thinking about.
Thank you.
Going-
I have a question from a grandmother and guardian of an autistic child who has experienced trauma, and she outlines two areas of concern that might be separate questions. Um, I might be freezing. Am I freezing? No? Can you hear me?
A little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm a
Yeah.
commercial. Sorry.
I think
Okay.
mine looks like it might be unstable as well, so I hope that hasn't interfered.
No, I think it's been fine. Okay, the question was, first of all, trauma training for teachers and funds for school districts to better help understand and help traumatized students, especially disabled,
Mhm.
traumatized children. Um, I think this was a huge issue in Massachusetts before COVID, and it's only worse now. So,
Right.
do you have any particular thoughts on?
Well, I think it's a big issue, and also you should know that the Office of the Child Advocate had a
Mhm.
separate commission looking at trauma, and they've just come out with their report. So I think it's worth. It's probably online. I think one should, you should maybe take a look at that. So, I mean, it's something that we are very concerned about. And I feel honored that I have an opportunity to work with the child advocate. We meet weekly, as well as with the Department of Children and Families. Not weekly, but frequently. So I think that trauma is a huge issue. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of work in that direction. And I think there will be more.
Yeah.
Help people understand better, what does trauma look like and how do we move forward in that
Yeah.
area.
And I mean, I looked at the report briefly, it just came out, and one of the recommendations was for a sort of centralized trauma and wellness
Mhm.
resource center around the state. I think that would be great
Yeah.
and could be very helpful for school districts who are learning how to deal with trauma better. She also mentions that her autism spectrum grandson is not able to access the curriculum via remote learning, and he is marked absent. This is an issue that we have had a lot of calls about at the Federation, and part of it, I think, is that schools just don't know what to do.
Mhm.
But in some cases, we've even had CRAs, child requiring assistance, petitions filed with courts by schools. And we've also heard of 51As, which are the filing for potential abuse and neglect being filed with DCF. DCF has been pretty clear that that is not something they're looking to investigate, but it's really problematic, and I don't know of a good solution. But is this something that you're hearing about for kids who can't access online?
Right. I mean, I think personally there needs to be a lot more training uh,
Mhm,
around autism. And
mhm.
I know that I've been working with a group you're probably familiar with from Newton called Understanding Our Differences.
Yeah.
And it's I think a very important organization that goes into the elementary schools and talks about, disabilities and autism, and they get some information about that. They have kids come in, like the young
Mhm,
man who works in my office who has Down syndrome. He goes in and talks to the elementary
mhm.
school kids about what it's like to have Downs, and so they are bringing in opportunities for young people. I think it should go higher. They also feel it should go higher up to even they say middle school. I think it could go beyond that, but we're trying to get some funding for them to be able to, move more into more schools. I think that they are, they're interested in moving beyond Newton, but to other schools, districts, and I think that that's been an area of interest in terms of how to educate people about autism. I think the kids all the way through high school need that and beyond. And I think we need to educate our police departments, there's so many ways that we can be helpful. And so that's definitely something on my mind that I think is definitely important. And there may be some legislation filed along those lines to look at. So yeah, I think we all need to know more. And again, it's a continuum. It's, there are different levels, I think, in terms of autism. And there's just so many things I think that we can be doing. And so
yeah, I actually participated in the autism training for understanding our differences because I was volunteer when my son, who's on the autism spectrum, was in the 5th grade. And it was really helpful because they explained a lot about sensory overload and challenges. And one of the kids turned to me and said, "Is that why he wears headphones all the time?" And I'm like, yeah. So it sounds small, but it makes a big difference.
Right. So I would like to see that program expanded. I think there could be a lot done with that. So that's something that I'll be trying to work on going forward. So, I mean, just so many things that we all need to learn and how to be more helpful in so many ways.
I'm just scanning through questions as we're talking, so I don't mean to be rude. Okay, here's a comment rather than a question. My grandchildren use their school Chromebooks for the remote therapy services as well as for school. Oops, I keep losing my question because people are adding more. An adult is normally required to be present during the therapy services. Is this also a rule for remote therapy and congregate care services? Then it could reduce the amount of remote mental health care those students receive. And I think that's an excellent point, that if, because we know that staffing in the group homes has been a problem with getting kids online for school, but other services, ancillary services, mental health, teletherapy, all of that probably needs the support as well.
Right, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's something I'm not so familiar with in terms of how much is happening in group care around that particular issue, but certainly something that I'll check on and see what we can be doing. But good points.
Okay, next question as we come into our last few minutes. This attendee would like to thank you for all of your hard work. There's a large need for foster homes that are willing or able to work with children with complex medical needs. And it keeps popping up. Is there a way that the legislature can assist in this area where DCF is not able to recruit or maintain foster homes that can provide for these children? Foster children should not have to stay in hospitals or skilled nursing facilities for weeks or months while DCF searches for foster homes willing to take these children.
So, well, first of all, I would like to thank anybody that's on the call who is a foster parent or from working as a foster family. I just admire anyone who has taken this on, because it's not easy, and often these children are coming with lots of needs. And so I just have to say that I'm very, very grateful, I think, to anyone who steps up. And I also know there are a number of families that would like to be able to help with very more difficult medical needs. So I think that, it's important to be thinking about this. I think, to support families that really want to take this on. I think it's really admirable. And there's so many different kinds of, special needs. And often I think some of these more medically challenging cases are, families maybe give up their children because they don't know what to do. They don't have the ability to care for them, take care of them. So I think, supporting this is really important. And I guess I I was unable to talk and write all the questions down, so I hope that you'll pass them forward, Eileen, so
Of
that
course.
that we can take a really good look. And again, this is the time we're putting together legislation, thinking of what we can do going forward to be more helpful. So I know that my committee would be very interested in seeing what
I absolutely will.
so.
I also, I know that the Mass Adoption Resource Exchange does a lot of work with trying to find permanent homes for kids who have medical disabilities, and that has been a real focus for them. And they have partnered with the Federation in some efforts to get the word out about families, trying to find families who can open their homes and be parents to these children. The other point I wanted to make just briefly before we sign off is that an issue that's come up a fair amount with foster families is training around special education. What we do in the Federation with the kids who are in congregate care in our SESP program, Special Education Surrogate Parents, we give them hours of training, we support them, but foster parents get very little, if any, training around how to deal with special education, how to do IEPs, how to manage with the school. I think it's even gotten worse, more complicated with COVID. It's something that the Family Advisory Committee of DCF has been working on. We're going to set up a pilot series of trainings for some foster parents, but I think it's a really big need for foster parents to have more support around that area. And when you're, thinking about things like the Bill of Rights and other legislation to help foster parents, access to good training about trauma and special education is just really critical. So just making my own little pitch there.
Well, I would just say I'd like to put a plug in for the family resource centers. I don't know if the families, the folks that are online are familiar with the family resource centers. And I think that they are a very important piece of all of this, because there's a perfect place to maybe hold some virtual seminars that parents could tune into around some of the questions that are coming up. Learn more about trauma, to learn more about, how do you deal with IEPs, and how do you advocate for your child that you're caring for in the school system, so that they get an IEP or get their needs taken care of when they have an IEP. So I could see the family resource centers as being a great place to really have some opportunity to bring people together who are thinking about the same thing, so that you're all kind of on the same page and you can talk to one another and have opportunities to share, things that work for you, and how to advocate with the schools. Because
that's a great suggestion. And I would say that just because I work on a program called Pathways for Parents that supports the family resource centers around special education. But so much of what we do now is regular education issues, trauma-related issues, because the families are just going through so much in this pandemic.
And to feel the support, of other families, I think can also generate, a better outcome as well. So like I said, I'm a big supporter of the family resource centers. I think
that's great.
Been a place for families to, hook in and to advocate for that. I think, is a good thing to think about.
Yeah, and I think the more we can support the family resource centers around staffing and maintaining the levels of staffing that they need, that's fantastic. Representative Kahn, we are going to be sending you a list of all the questions that have been submitted. I apologize for not getting to them all. And we thank you very, very much for participating in our webinar and joining us today with answering all of these questions. It's been fantastic.